To this, another episode of A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is where we break down and discuss episodes of TV shows that you may not have even heard of. I believe these TV shows need a little more love, and that is what this platform is here to do. Each week we will be covering different shows from all over the globe. We'll be breaking down each episode, giving you the main highlights, and going through it bit by bit. But for now, I think it's best that we find out what's on the menu today. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 7 of season 8, and today we are finally getting into episodes of Clarice and anything to do with the Silence of the Lambs universe. But I've absolutely loved watching this season again. I have been reminded how great it has been throughout, and I think it deserved a second season. As you know, I'm definitely wanting that 4th season of Hannibal, and if they can integrate some of the characters from here into that, I'm all for it. Because I think it would be absolutely worth it. I think it'd just tie the series nice together, and we'll be able to see Rebecca Breeds do her thing once more as Clarice, because I think she's absolutely knocked it out of the park in this series. But let's go back to find out what's been going on. So, Clarice has been investigating these murders of these 3 women, which then turned into 4 women when a drugs rep ended up dead as well. Now, this was a pretty open and shut case. They found the guy that actually committed the murders, but when they actually dragged him into custody, he ended up dead as well. He was poisoned while he was in the interrogation room by an external force. And so it would seem that there was a massive cover-up going on, and now Clarice and the team had to find out what the hell was going on. As time went on, Clarice managed to find out that the person who was running all of this, or seemed to be running all of this, was a man named Joe Hudlin, and he seems to be pulling a lot of strings in this whole thing. However, they didn't have anything really to go on at the time until they met an accountant by the name of Julia Lawson, who works at a company called Alasta Pharmaceuticals, and it would seem that the women that had been killed had all been on a drug trial for that company, and they died due to the fact that they were silenced because there were issues when it came to pregnancies, and it was potentially surrounding these drug trials. So it's starting to feel like this guy, Joe Hudlin, is actually some sort of fixer instead of just a lawyer. So due to the issues of her past, Clarice has been going to her therapist office quite a lot. And while she's been there, she's been talking to her therapist about the incidents that have happened prior to this series with Buffalo Bill, but also some of the things that have been within this series. But we've also seen the relationship that occurred between Clarice and her father and how that actually panned out for her. And so we know that the therapist dug into the relationship and found that it may not be all that Clarice believed. Clarice has always been someone who loved her father and know that he wouldn't do anything bad or dodgy or whatever. She got into the police force because of her father. And so now she has to find out what this all means, because she has started to see things in a different light when it comes to her father. And of course, at the end of the last episode, she took Catherine Martin to a police station after Catherine Martin broke into Buffalo Bill's mother's house. And it would seem that even though Lila Gum didn't want to actually press charges, Clarice has tried to do the right thing, but now she may end up getting fired for this because Catherine Martin is the daughter of the Attorney General, Ruth Martin. So this is Clarice, Season 1, Episodes 11 to 13. Episode 11, Achilles' Heel. So at the start of this episode, Clarice is plagued by these nightmares, and now it seems that she's also having nightmares about what happened to her when she was with her father. Certain things are starting to come back to her that she would have blocked out, and it seems that the 3 men under the streetlight were bad people, and that maybe her father was involved in something that he shouldn't have been, and the fact that she idolised him, she would have blocked it out. But even though her mind's so muddled when it comes to her father, it seems that it's given her some sort of clarity. So, because this is a whole conspiracy around several different things, she's realising that just because it is a company, she needs to think of it as one mind, and that one mind is Joe Hudlin. And she needs to treat him as if he was a serial killer so that she can get into his mind and profile him as such. And she will be able to figure out all of this and why it's happened and what is going on. However, then Clarice takes a phone call from Julia Lawson, the accountant, and Julia tells her that Alasta are actually going to be in negotiations to sell up, which will mean that any evidence is put away in a warehouse, and that warehouse will probably be locked for good. So they really need to act quickly. And of course, at the head of all of this is Joe Hudlin. He's the one who is sorting out this buyout, and so Julia tries to help them out, even though Clarice tells her to stay put, because she's in more trouble than enough. One thing that I forgot to mention is that, like I've said, Julia is trans, and Joe Hudlin knows all about it. Julia thought that she kept it from them, but she didn't. And when Joe actually called her by her dead name, she knew she was in trouble. And so Clarice goes to speak to Tyson Conway. The reason for that is because Tyson is actually the son of Niles Hagen, who is the owner of Alasta Pharmaceuticals. And she tries to gain information on Joe Hudlin, which obviously Tyson picks up on and realises that that's who she's going after. As for Joe, it seems that this man has somewhat of a hold over Niles Hagen, and Tyson tells her that his father is kind of under Joe's spell. I mean, doesn't sound like anyone else we know in the world right now, but I'm sure one or two of you will correct me on that one. But Clarice needs to act fast. Like I've said, this company is on its way to be sold up. And so her and her team head over to Alasta Pharmaceuticals to try and find out exactly what's going on, and even poke the bear a little bit and see what Joe Hudlin is all about. Julia obviously disregards everything that she's been told and heads upstairs, but when she gets there she finds out that everything is being cleared out. She manages to find a room with some files in it and locks herself in there and starts scanning them over to one of the FBI agents who is still at the FBI offices. Of course, at this point, Clarice and the team are in the building. So when Julia ends up ultimately in trouble because she shouldn't be where she is and security come to get her, Agent Escoval has to head upstairs to try and help her out. But, of course, he shouldn't be up there either. He watches as they take her out and take her downstairs, and it seems like they're going to attack her. Clarice, however, has been taken out of the meeting and taken up to see Niles Hagen. Tyson, his son, has told Clarice that he's not really in his right mind at the minute, and everything that's going on with Joe Hudlin doesn't really bode well. He wonders what this guy really has on his father. When Clarice actually starts to question Niles Hagen about what's been going on and everything to do with his son, it seems that he has majority of control up until the point when she accuses Niles as not being Tyson's father. And as soon as he does that, he starts to get aggressive, slam his fists and throw a tantrum until the meeting is interrupted by Joe Hudlin. Joe has found out that someone, i.e. Julia, has been caught upstairs and has been taken by security to actually be processed for what she's been doing. She shouldn't have been in there in the first place. And when Joe pulls Niles out of his meeting, Clarice realises something's wrong. She also sees another man in a reflection, and this turns out to be the police officer from episode 3, the man that actually poisoned the hitman who Alasta Pharmaceuticals actually paid to get rid of these women. And so Clarice makes her excuses. She hears parts of the conversation that they have to deal with the situation, and Clarice decides to head out and head back downstairs. However, when she gets down to the meeting room where they were previously, she finds out from one of her team that Julia is in trouble. They head down to the basement and they find Julia down there, but just as she's about to get taken out, the FBI run in all guns blazing, and Julia is given back to them. Joe Hudlin tells the FBI that everything that happened was a mistake, but we can see that he's seething about this. And thankfully, Julia is kept safe. However, when they get back to the FBI officers and they are looking through the file of what Julia had managed to send them before she actually got caught, there's not a lot to go on, but there is a decent amount. However, Julia looks at them and smiles and just says, well, you can have the rest later, because it turns out she was clever enough to actually write on an envelope and send it to her grandmother. And in 3 to 5 working days, she can go pick it up from her grandmother, and they are going to have all the evidence they need to prosecute this company. When Tyson speaks to Clarice, obviously Clarice thinks that she's got the victory here. He's not pleased with the way that Clarice was with his father, and he believes that she's done this out of malice towards him, and that she was just using Tyson to get close to his father. And we see that very night, very similar to the start, Clarice has a bad dream. This time we go further into the dream and we see that actually Clarice didn't stay in the car. It seems as though Clarice was being used as some sort of shield for her father. Clarice was sent down an alley towards 3 men under a streetlight. Clarice held what looked to be an envelope of cash, while her dad stood in the background watching her walk away. And it's almost as if he was sending her down there because he knew that they wouldn't hurt her, whereas he potentially could end up injured or dead. And so, like I said, maybe Clarice's father wasn't as clear-cut as everyone says, or at least Clarice thinks. Niles Hagen ends up calling Ruth Martin, and he reminds her of the backing that he's given her in the past. Apparently he has given her lots of money towards her election campaign, and he could do that again the next time she wants in, but he could also ruin her life if she doesn't make this whole case go away. And so where we thought it might have been Joe Hudlin, actually this could be coming from the top, and that Niles Hagen is the bad guy and not being manipulated, because Niles Hagen threatens Ruth Martin and tells her that he will not only pull his money from her next campaign, but he'll also potentially go after Catherine. And since Catherine already is in trouble with the law, just because she's been put in what looks to be a psychiatric facility, doesn't mean that he won't do something to make things worse for her. And so going into the last 2 episodes, we've got a lot more to clear up. Clarice doesn't know what's going on with her father or what happened, but the picture's coming clearer and clearer. There are still several suspects in this investigation, and Clarice isn't sure where she's going yet with that either, and neither is the team. And what's Tyson going to do in all this after his fallout with Clarice? Where does he lie in all this? Because there was some sinister music going on while he was talking to her, so we can only imagine that things are going to go bad. Episode 12, Father Time. And so we see that Clarice is starting to unravel a little bit when she actually goes to see her therapist, and it's on Clarice's request. As soon as her therapists start asking questions, especially about the deal with her father, Clarice wants it blocked out. She doesn't want to think about it, she just wants to be able to get on with her job, and that's what she thought the therapist would do, not stir shit up. And it would obviously seem that even though the incident with Buffalo Bill is affecting her, but now in the past, and the fact that she was injured in the field while in that hospital, when Joe Hudlin took hold of her and took her out, it would seem that the focus of what Clarice is thinking about right now is the incident with her father. But she doesn't want to face any of it. She just wants to be able to do her job. And so, after she ends her session prematurely because she's pissed off with her therapist, she heads off to work. And today is the day that she's actually going to be raiding Alesta Pharmaceuticals. So this is a big moment for her and for the team, and they have to make sure that they get this right. When they're up in Niles Hagen's office, Clarice talks about a painting that Niles kept going on about throughout the whole last episode. Now, I know I called him Niles in the last episode, and that's because I didn't listen properly to his name. So this picture seems to be significant to Niles, and so Clarice wants it analysing. She has it taken off the wall and taken back to the officers, as well as loads of other stuff that obviously business-related files, financial documents, the whole works. So even though they were getting rid of a load of stuff in the last episode, it turns out that Niles still had a lot of files up in his office. While Krendler looks on, he doesn't want to make this too much of a issue and doesn't want the press hanging around, but obviously this is a big CEO getting arrested and the press have turned up. He thinks he can combat this by going to talk to them first, but turns out Niles is already out there. And while he's talking to the press, Krendler literally has to walk out of the Alesta Pharmaceuticals building and arrest Niles on the spot. And Niles is playing up to this frail old man stereotype. Later, after probably his interrogation, Niles takes Hudlin home. Hudlin thinks that he's in the clear for all of this, and that all he has to do is make sure that Niles gets off and everything will be okay. However, just then 2 cars pull up outside of his house. Hudlin rings the only person that he knows will be able to help him and listen to his story, and of course that's Krendler. He tells Krendler that this wasn't just about him. He didn't do all of this, he was just the financial guy, and he certainly didn't do any of the sex stuff. Krendler doesn't know what to think of all of this, and then he is struggling down the end of the line, and by the time that they turn up at the scene, obviously Hudlin is then dead. There is, however, evidence all over the room that suggests that not only has he written a confession, but he also shot himself. It was a professional team that came in and did this, but they were all under the instruction of Nils Hagen. Clarice, however, when she actually gets to the scene, ends up getting harassed by one of her own colleagues, but ends up being harassed by another teammate from a different team, who actually is on the team of Ardelia Mapp. Esquivel tries to stick up for her, but he ends up getting held back. And when this arrogant prick starts mouthing off at Clarice again, she does the exact right thing. I don't condone violence, but this guy deserved his nose breaking, and that is exactly what Clarice did. However, due to this outburst, she knows that she's going to have to go and speak to her therapist again, and when she does, her therapist tells her that maybe she's not ready to be back at work. Maybe she shouldn't have been back at work all along. And especially with this thing looming over her head with her father, maybe that's what is affecting her so bad. Clarice doesn't know what to think, but it seems like now she is wanting to get out of this job as soon as possible. Now let's not forget that when this series started, Clarice just wanted a happy life behind a desk, just analysing data and people and not actually dealing with the outside factors. She would just sit behind a desk and make decisions and give the FBI teams something to work with so that they could profile this person and they could find the person that they're looking for, but she'd never actually be hands-on. So it seems like she's doing things that would be out of character to try and make sure that she ends up behind a desk again. Clarice is told that her therapist needs to make sure that she is okay to be back out in the field. And even though Clarice insults her therapist signs the piece of paper, thinking that's what Clarice wants. Clarice ends up heading back to FBI headquarters, and when she actually speaks to Krendler, she tells him that she hasn't been signed off. Krendler, about to pick up the phone, tells her he needs her, and they just need to speak to the therapist. But Clarice puts her gun and badge on the desk. She's done with the case. She's done with the FBI for now. She needs to sit this one out. The team investigating actually find this painting very interesting because when they spray luminol on this painting, they see that there is some sort of bodily fluids in the background, and so they go to speak to the artist. I mean, eventually when the artist is brought in to talk about this particular painting, she tells them that Nils Hagen provided the blood that is on the canvas and was mixed with paint that she actually used for the art piece. And it would seem that this woman ended up in a relationship with Nils. She's a hell of a lot younger than Nils, but she wanted a leg up in the art community, and this was a good way to do it. She saw an opportunity and she took it. But it was only when Nils found out that she couldn't actually have children that he got rid of her. While examining the painting, they find 5 what looked like stars in the top corner. They start to take samples and find out that it's actually fetal cells that have been ingrained into this painting. They start to look at examples and start to look through files and find out that some match some of the people that have already been killed. They start to look into the background of some of these people, and they actually find that potentially the person they need to be looking at right now isn't just Nils, but it's actually Tyson, because the charity that he runs brings women from overseas, and then the men end up going back. And so essentially he is trafficking these women for his father, because his father wants to create children. But also the drugs that they're on end up causing deformities. And so it seems like he's just having these embryos aborted and then added to his painting, which, saying that out loud, is fucking vile. Absolutely horrendous. But speaking of horrendous, at this particular point, Clarice has been out for a run. She has seen, while out on this run, because it's managed to clear her head, what actually happened that night with her father. She ended up walking down the alley and gave the money to these men. However, at the front of all this money was a $100 bill, but at the back was all ones. Turns out that her father wasn't playing straight with these guys and sent his daughter in as collateral, knowing they probably wouldn't do anything. However, that wasn't the case. they put a gun to Clarice's head and tell him that they will pull the trigger if he doesn't comply. This is the thing that shocks Clarice the most, and she ends up bursting into tears. She goes home from her run, and when she gets there, she gets a visit from someone. Just as the FBI are figuring out that Nils and Tyson are actually bringing in all these women and trafficking them and getting them pregnant, Tyson turns up at Clarice's door, and obviously Clarice believes that Tyson is a good guy, and she lets him in because he wants to talk about his father. Episode 13, Family is Freedom. And so we're in the endgame now, and obviously Clarice sits down with Tyson. As they do, Tyson starts to talk about his father, and basically how he's been manipulated over time. At this point, however, Clarice's beeper is going off. At first, it's just a message to call in, but she ignores that, with Tyson being there. However, moments later, she gets another message saying Tyson equals suspect. Instantly, she's alerted to the fact that this isn't the right situation to be in right now, and she needs to get out of there as soon as possible. Obviously, she knows what his father has been up to, and now she is in their crosshairs. She tries to make a run for it, but as she does, she gets collared by two goons. She gets tied up and she gets taken to an animal testing facility. And this is where all the women who have been trafficked have been taken in the past. And it turns out that there are still some in the facility. Esquivel knows from his military background that there is someone he knows that will have answers to where Clarice currently is, and so he goes off to speak to them. However, when he gets there, it's less speaking and more violence. He takes this guy out until this guy talks, because right now time is of the essence. Clarice could be dead, and they wouldn't know. They need to find out where she is. And so when he comes back to the office and tells everyone where they are, they mobilise and head out. This includes Ardelia Mapp, who has basically told her boss to go fuck himself because this is important. This isn't about teams, this is about the collective unit. Clarice is her friend and she wants to be there for her to make sure that she comes out of this alive. Niels begins telling his master plan of why he's done what he's been doing to Clarice. As always, the villain has to have the monologue. We know this from any film we've ever watched. That's just the way it goes. They chat and chat and chat until the heroes come in and save the day. This time the hero is in the centre of the room. And so while Tyson and Niels are arguing over what's going to happen next, the FBI have got to the doors of this facility. As they begin to set up teams and try to head inside, one of the security guys inside tells Niels that they need to leave. They need to go now. Niels doesn't want to, and he keeps referencing the fact that he's got children in there. Not the women he's been abusing for so long, but his children. Clarice asks where the children are, but never gets an answer. Eventually, Niels gets tired of the security guard and shoots him in the head. And this is the part where Clarice uses the distraction to take out both Niels and Tyson. She runs off and runs into another room where she unfortunately finds the children. These are glass specimen jars, and within each one there is a deformed fetus. It turns out that many years earlier, Niels had a younger brother, and Niels' brother had a deformity. His father, Niels' father, didn't know what to do with him, whether it was to kill him or not, because he really wasn't well. And so he left it up to Niels as to what they should do. And that is when Niels says he was truly born, and so he killed his own brother. But from that day, he wanted to make sure that any children that he bore weren't that way. But it turns out, because of the drugs that he was using, and it turns out this was just a simple migraine drug, and that's what it was on the market for, but it was causing birth defects. And so these women that came in for these trials, Niels is the one who's been having them kidnapped and put in this facility. Clarice sees exactly what he is and who he is, and tries to convince Tyson of this, because at this point, Tyson is the one holding the gun. He has it pointed at Clarice, and he's threatening to shoot her. But as he is, Clarice is trying to reason with him. She's trying to let him know exactly who his father is, because it seems like his father has been brainwashing him all this time. And as she does, she tells him that this is probably what happened to his mother. His mother found out that she was pregnant with Tyson, told Niels about it because Niels was the father, And once Tyson was born and a little bit older, Niels came after him. Finding out that he was a fit and healthy boy, he wanted his heir and he took Tyson from his mother, claiming that his mother had died from a mysterious lung illness. And that is why Tyson ends up so dependent on his father and so entrenched in what his father has been doing, because he believes that his father loves him when actually his father doesn't really care. Eventually, while Niels is trying to reason with Tyson, he calls Tyson's mother a whore, which to anyone would make them snap. And of course Tyson does, and he shoots his father, crashing him into all these jars of fetuses. Eventually Tyson asks whether he's going to be okay, but Clarice reminds him that he's part of this. He's the one who's been doing the trafficking. He's the one who's been assisting with the sexual assaults. He's the one that has been kidnapping these people. And also, multiple people have died now, and he's on the hook for all of it. She doesn't even try to talk him down from the ledge when he puts the gun against his face and blows his brains out. The team, however, have got inside, and Krendler ends up getting shot. But eventually, Ardelia finds Clarice, and they head out. The next few days for Clarice are just reconciling with what the hell's happened. Not only with Niels and Tyson, but also what's been going on with her father and what's been going on in her own head. She goes to see Krendler in hospital, and he tells her that she needs to take time off. Even though she's quit, she asks for a job back, but he says, you can, but you need time away. I'm giving you 2 weeks paid. She goes to see Catherine Martin, and she talks to her about everything that happened. And when Catherine starts to talk about her own mother, Ruth Martin, Clarice gets another memory. It's a memory we've seen before in the show where her mother and her father had a massive argument, and it was not long before Clarice got sent away. But this time it's very different. She sees that her mother and father were fighting because, well, it's potentially because of what we saw in the previous episode, where Clarice ended up getting threatened with a gun to her head, and that her father was no longer safe around his own daughter. And the fact that these gangsters, whoever they were, knew who his daughter was now. And that's potentially why she sent Clarice away, to keep her safe. And so Clarice knows, after talking to Catherine, that she needs to do the one thing that she hasn't done in many years. And so she drives back to West Virginia. She drives home, and she drives to see her mother. Okay, so I'm trying to gather my thoughts on this just as I go along. But because there's two schools of thought, as far as I'm concerned, this show was excellent. It really was. It was fucking brilliant. And part of me thinking that maybe I'd want a bit more sort of killer of the week type of vibe to it. But then just the whole investigation, the way that the first, 9 episodes varied from different kind of genres of cop show. And it was just really, really good and really clever. But part of me is thinking maybe there needs to be a bit more sort of cop drama in it, as in they were finding other people, like in the second episode when they did the whole sort of near Waco thing. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. And obviously everyone is entitled to their own opinion on what this series was. But I think it was great. I think they could have done with a second series. I think they could have cleared up a little bit of what happened to Clarice when it actually came to her parents, because it is still a little bit up in the air towards the end, but it's a good premise. We know that Clarice idolises her father from the films because we've seen it, but this just shows that there's always other ways to think about it. I've said it before on this show, and I'll say it again, that Rebecca Breeds in this was brilliant. She really was. She nailed Clarice, and apart from Jodie Foster, I mean, Julianne Moore was great as well, but Jodie Foster is always going to be the one. But I think that Rebecca Breeds did such a good job. And if they were going to do a season 4 of Hannibal and she gets a part in it as Clarice, I can't think of anyone better. I think it would be such a good idea, such a good coup for everyone involved. And who knows? Maybe this will then come back, because as far as I'm aware, I mean, I've read this on Wikipedia earlier, but as far as I'm aware, this show wasn't actually closed off. It was never actually officially cancelled. Again, that is Wikipedia, and that is edited by many, many people, so could be entirely wrong, but I don't know. maybe it's not wrong, and maybe in 2026, 2027, we get Hannibal Season 4, Clarice Season 2, and they can wrap it all up in a nice little bow. Like I said before, we know that Hannibal gets away at the end of the Silence of the Lambs film, so maybe you have them do the whole Silence of the Lambs film in Season 4 of Hannibal, or maybe split it into two halves like they did before with Season 3. Have the bit with the Silence of the Lambs towards the end, have Buffalo Bill involved, and then head off to do Season 2 of Clarice. At the end of the season, Mads Mikkelsen turns up, does a cameo, all's good in the world. You know, that's just me thinking out loud. But this show was excellent, really was. Such incredible acting, the storylines were great, and it's just a shame that we aren't getting any more of it. So there isn't a lot to say going forward, because there's no point in wrapping up the character arcs, because we don't know what's going to happen next season, because there isn't going to be one, as far as we're aware. So, look, I'm rambling. I'm done for now. I hope everyone's doing all right out there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing to the Patreon. Thank you for going out buying the books from my friends. It's all good. It's all love. I'm absolutely loving doing this podcast. And at this point in recording, I know we're very close to 1 million. So if you do like this podcast and you want others to hear it, send it out to friends. Get them to listen to it. Come follow me on Instagram. Come find me over there at A Million Little TV. And until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye. And that is it for now, amigos. And yes, I am as angry as you are at me for that sentence, but I hope you enjoyed the show and had some fun along the way. It means a lot that you are listening and supporting me. This is an independent podcast after all, and doesn't get a lot of backing, so it is great to know that you're out there, you're listening. And if you want to come talk to me on any of the platforms I'm on, just come say hi. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm even a little bit on TikTok. I don't post that much, but I'm on there. And you can also drop comments in the comment sections on any of the platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you get podcasts from. But as always, thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon.